Well, that brings us on to potentially another concept then that they could put inside it, which is a kind of like hydrobot concept.
So this now we're talking about actually accessing the ocean, right? Directly.
Rather than the Dragon, you could sit on top and you could sample things around you, which would be cheaper, but essentially the same as a lander that's on the Clipper mission type thing. Similar types. You'll end up with similar science. Maybe you could end up with more payload delivered there, or it'll be cheaper or whatever. But it's not going to go through to the ocean, which
is really the ultimate goal. Even the surface landers, even the orbiters, really are trying to work out what's going on under the surface.
They're all sampling stuff, the material that's come up essentially, because they want to know what's going on under.
That's what we want to know as well.
That's
what everybody wants to know. What's happening.
That's the big question
down there. So obviously the best way to do that, if you could, would be to go down there. So and people are talking about how to do that. That is a thing that is being talked about.
Yeah, there's that ice. So for a while, there's been some concepts that you would get some kind of a probe that would effectively melt its way through the ice, and then once it gets through to the bottom of the ice, would open up something and allow a small like submersible thing to go off and explore the gigantic ocean.
Yeah.
So this is like totally hypothetical.
It is.
But I mean, that's the ultimate way you'd want to explore the European Ocean. People have been talking about this concept for years, 20 years, maybe at least 10.
Yeah, sure.
There is a project that's developing a kind of prototype version of this for exploring subglacial lakes on Earth, and then eventually below the ice caps on Mars and below the ice sheet.
Is this one of these melting?
Yeah, I think it's called the ice mole or something, and it basically, it's pretty basic at the moment, but essentially like a kind of almost cylindrical. I think it's actually a sort of square shape, but probe that has a hot plate at the front and a sort of screw like drill core at the front, which actually I think ingests ice into sampling things in the middle of it, and it actually they used it. That blood. I think it's called
Blood Falls, Antarctica.
They've used it to sample something underneath that.
Oh, cool.
Recently.
That's
and so
awesome.
they can sterilise the front of the drill bit, but not anything else. And that's the only bit that came in contact with whatever they were sampling, the Blood Falls thing. So that was fine to be sampled that way. Obviously a big problem with a hydrobot or something that is going below the surface, below the ice sheet in Europa, is that that's. Sometimes people say that planetary protection goes too far in certain areas, so there's some arguments that it's overused in places like Mars and hinders certain exploration efforts because realistically you're not going to get something that's going to go into the deep subsurface of Mars and really affect anything because the surface is uninhabitable. In the case of Europa, you can't piss around.
No. That could be an absolute disaster if you contaminate Europa.
Yeah.
We talked about this a bit last week.
Yeah, we did.
But especially if it's a habitable ocean.
Yeah.
Whether or not it has its own biosphere, if it's a habitable oceon and we take something there,
you have to be able to test if it has its own biosphere, though. Like reliably test that.
Yeah, exactly.
At some point.
But I'm saying whether or not, even before we even know the answer to that.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what the answer is at this point. Contamination from Earth is just a bad outcome.
Yeah, it's disastrous.
Yeah. We just sort of shut the door.
You could seed the European Ocean with life.
Yeah, which could go crazy.
You have no idea.
Depending on what's down there.
No idea. Potentially it could.
Yeah.
Depends what ends up being on the thingy, but you don't want to do that.
It's an alien invasion from Earth, basically, is what it is.
Yeah. And then,
and that's tricky. That's tricky because it's sort of impossible to get something 100% absolutely confirmed sterile.
Yes. That you can do it. It's tricky with spacecraft instrumentation, so it's not hard to get something completely sterile if it's just a lump of steel. You just chuck it in a furnace.
Sure.
And
or like a bottle, like a glass bottle, in the lab. Just chuck it in an autoclave.
Yeah. That might deliver some. An autoclave, is what you. That's the level of sterility you want, really. At least. Yeah. And potentially more than that as well. You maybe want to get rid of all the DNA, everything like that.
Yeah. So
UV sterilized, all this kind of stuff. An autoclave is just like a pressure oven, by the way.
Yeah.
Which we use in labs to sterilize, like glassware and lab equipment and things. So you want to be able to some way sterilize the craft. But how you do that, they've always had problems with this in almost any spacecraft. They always swab them to look for the types of organisms, or the biomass, the kind of payload it's bringing to
the
another.
bioload.
And they always have something.
They always have something, exactly. So you can look up, the Curiosity rover had a certain number of microorganisms or spores per pure square centimetre of surface or something like that on the rover, which is a tiny amount compared to what you find generally around.
And again, not so problematic on Mars, potentially not so problematic. But on Europa,
one is enough. One cell on that ice mole or whatever is enough.
Maybe you could use the surface radiation on Europa to help sterilize it.
Just leave it out on the surface for a while. Yeah, it's possible.
And just work out, the maximum time that an organism or a piece of DNA could withstand that. And
yeah, but again, you're always going to have the uncertainty of something being somehow shielded in the shade and just not quite. It's a question of whether you're going to. Are you ever going to be sure enough that you've got it sterile, properly sterile, and is the risk worth it? Is the risk of that disastrous outcome of contaminating the ocean worth
trying to explore it in the first place?
Yeah. It's a tricky one.
Yeah. I mean, I think ultimately we have to try and sample it. Whether that's, again, it's one of those, it's like that Chinese emperor tomb we were talking about.
Yeah.
When do you go in? Is the technology ever ready?
Yeah.
But, I mean, if we don't know anything's there, I don't know. It's tricky because does something have value if we don't know what's
the point?
Directly
what's
related
the point?
To us? Why? But maybe I don't know. I mean, but I don't know how you value that type of thing. But obviously, we should just make, if we do decide to explore it, which we will. Like of course we're going to try and find out how to get underneath. Of course, that's going to happen. Especially if there's really interesting hints of stuff in the ice above.
I mean, the first generation of these missions, the upcoming missions now, which are going to be looking at the surface, that's going to give us a whole bunch of new information. We'll be able to maybe constrain to a much greater degree what's going on under the surface.
I think if you spent enough money and spent enough time, humans are smart enough to work out a way to engineer out almost all of the risks.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can have.
Because they do it for subantarctic lakes. I mean, they sample subantarctic lakes.
Exactly.
So what's the difference?
There were some dodgy ones.
Yeah,
some dodgy sampling was done in Lake
up.
Vostok.
Yeah.
Some drilling, using non-sterile drilling fluids and stuff. Bad.
Yeah.
But they would not be doing that.
The Lake Ellsworth drilling, which unfortunately failed due to various issues with the pumps and stuff, but they had gone to incredible lengths to make sure it was all sterile. Everything was sterile. All the water, all the hot water they were using to drill the hole.
Yeah, it was
a
all
hot
like
water drill.
Yeah.
All of that water was sterilized by numerous methods, at least two methods: autoclaving and filtering, and possibly even UV sterilized as well before it was pumped down the hole. All of the equipment, the drill heads and everything, had been individually sterilized and then assembled in clean rooms and all this stuff.
Yes,
I mean, it was full on.
Yes, and they failed doing that. In a difficult environment on Earth. Imagine trying to do that in an environment, around Saturn, where you've got no, it's all done automatically.
Yeah.
Or it's.
But what I mean is that, yes, you're right. It's much, much, much more difficult, obviously.
But the risk, if it can be engineered out on the surface of the Earth,
yes,
that means it can be engineered out anywhere.
Yeah, we can get to a point on the Earth where we're satisfied that our sampling techniques are good enough to not contaminate our samples, basically, or not contaminate the environment. We're satisfied by that. So it should be possible to.
But they are. The difference is that they're sampling. So they were going to drag up a sample, weren't they, and collect the sample and then do analysis in some other place. So the sampling thing only needs to be kind of like a steel container that's been, put in a furnace for a bit or put in an autoclave and been sterilised some other methods. Then you just have to take some lake sample water and you can take that water somewhere else and do all the extra analysis stuff. All the circuit boards, all the stuff that needs to be sterile, everything that needs to go into a spacecraft has to be sterile, and some of those things you can't sterilize with heat, for example, the circuit boards. And
sure.
So I mean, it's
very tricky.
It's a lot more difficult, not just because of the remoteness, but because of the setup has to be totally different as well. So I mean that you can probably sterilize a kind of container in which to put everything. So there's like gated kind of
so you drill
systems
down just the interface between ice and water, and then sort of extrude the actual sterile part out into the water and sample it.
Sort of, yeah. Or the container that gets packed into the spacecraft.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you sterilize every aspect of the spacecraft?
It's gonna be
like
tricky.
how many layers out do you go?
It's gonna be very I don't know. Yeah.
So you potentially have to sterilize even in situ. So people have talked about doing things where you melt your way down and then fill the sort of, if the ice is freezing behind you, you fill the cavity you're in with some kind of horrific liquid that sterilizes the outside of the probe, and then carry on melting your way through until you get into the
So you've kind of sealed yourself off from the surface, you sterilize yourself in the middle of the ice sheet, and then keep going down.
Yeah,
that could work.
But then the thing you stick out, I mean, that's got to be sterile, and the bit inside's got to be sterile, and some of those bits inside can't be put through heating systems and whatnot. It's very difficult.
It's very difficult.
But there must be a way to do it.
There must be a way to do it. There must be a way to do it, and it's not like it's not like we're going to just write it off and say, okay, we'll never sample it because we're scared of contaminating it. We're obviously going to one day attempt to get down into that ocean, so we'll have to just engineer out those risks. And I think we will. I think we'll get to a point where we're satisfied, where the scientific community will be satisfied that we're controlling for everything. We're taking all the steps that we can.
If say there's a certain part of it that can never be sterilized, whether you could develop like a high temperature, a circuit board that can deal with very high temperatures or whatever, it's made of a particular type of something. But there's a bit in it that you can't ever sterilize. You aren't getting that probe back out, staying in the European Ocean, okay? So you have to, it's almost like you need to find a way of disposing, once it's done its mission, in the same way they have to dispose of, the two spacecraft we were talking about earlier. Would you be able to drive it into a kind of hydrothermal hotspot and just like burn it? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, sure.
So the outside can be sterilized reliably, and it will stay intact reliably for a period of time.
Yeah.
And then you dispose of it somehow in a way that means that
it's definitely just destroyed entirely.
What happens if you
self-destruct it? Yeah.
Load it with explosives.
Yeah, although is that going to kill everything? That might actually scatter stuff more. It'd be quite bad.
It's true. Or just something that makes it burn like thermite or something.
Yeah, napalm.
Napalm.
Just napalm it.
Napalm it. Something
really just unambiguous.
Like like the sort of
sterilizing
hypergolic rocket fuels where you mix two fuels together and they burn. That sort of thing, like a charge in there of something that means the entire thing, it just erases itself, like it melts all the metal and plastic and everything.
Yeah.
You could
all biological, anything that's in there that's biology just gets turned into like carbon dioxide in a flash, and that's it, gone.
And whatever it is, you could potentially have it contained in this steel thingy, so that everything inside melts into a blob, and the inside is totally sterile, and then it just floats around in the European Ocean until it erodes away and breaks apart.
Sure, yeah.
So you have like a self-destruct thingy.
Yeah, that's quite a good idea. So you sterilize the outside, and then the inside just self-destructs.
Essentially.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Because if you had an inside that didn't do that, then there's always the risk that it's going to eventually break open and release a non-sterile environment.
Yeah.
And you could more easily sterilize a hard sort of titanium outside or whatever. Still got to ingest samples though. There's got to be a way you could do that ingesting of samples that is non-contaminating. If you ensure that every sample you take in doesn't push anything back out, if it's like a negative pressure, that.
Yeah, although you'd be able to sterilize the interior of the sample containers, right?
Probably, yes, you would. Of course, you'd have to do that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you wouldn't know what you're analysing.
Yeah, exactly.
So you just have a sterile system.
So
there is a risk between
anything that's exposed to the ocean has to be just completely sterile.
Yeah.
The only thing that you can't do that with is obviously the interior electronics, which you self-destruct at the end.
Yeah.
Make sure they're totally sealed away. Yeah, as you're saying.
I guess there's a problem. It could also fail in flight, though. So if you
had explosives, some kind of explosive,
you've got to have something that ignites in a certain way that's not. Obviously, you don't want something unstable or something in there.
No,
but
that could be bad for the whole mission.
Yeah, exactly. So you definitely don't want that to happen. Makes that is somewhat. You've got to find a material of some sort that's going to be suitable for
or
those
just
purposes. That's stable throughout the flight and doesn't, has a very low probability of this type
something
of,
that maybe something that you have to arm in some way as you deploy it, rather than it just being like a hypergolic. Is it hypergolic? Is that the word?
I think so.
Of the fuels that you mix. I mean, that has the risk is just constantly there, because if they mix, then
I guess that's with the Dragon 2 though, and they're sending that out with a load of people in it and stuff.
That's true. I mean, spacecraft have tons
safe.
of fuel on them generally, so
I'm not saying that's a good way to do it with sort of weird rocket fuel.
No,
but,
sure.
You need something that you're confident in anyway.
Yeah, sure.
I guess
which might not be that hard.
Yeah. Maybe it might be hard to find something that's not explosive, but is just very high temperature.
Yeah,
that isn't going to overcome. You don't want it to overcome the confining pressure or the confining structure.
You just want it to erase the interior,
melt the entire inside.
Yeah.
I guess the other problem is that if it doesn't, if it fails, if the capsule that it's in fails in the European Ocean, and you haven't deployed the self-destruct thing, then you potentially sending something that's when you're sort of screwed.
That's screwed, yeah, because that would essentially, if water gets in, then there's like a conduit between the potentially not 100% sterile interior and the open ocean.
Yeah.
Just by having some kind of leak in there. Yeah. Which, I mean, that's absolutely not. That's not okay.
No.
So maybe if it has some way of sensing that. I don't know how you'd be 100% sure you are sensing that, but just some like pressure change or something like that.
Yeah, you would be able to probably
instantly just self-destructs. As soon as it senses anything like that, it just goes.
Yeah.
Just erases
because it's probably, unless it's a catastrophic failure.
Which I guess there'll be a possibility of it.
Yeah.
But imagine if the actual capsule of it was machined out of just a single piece of titanium or whatever.
Yes.
Obviously, it's going to have openings to ingest samples.
But that it could still essentially be machined out of one piece of metal.
Yeah. So if it was, then it would be quite hard for that to have a breach.
Yeah. Again, the breach might happen around where the holes are drilled to do the sampling or whatever. Yeah. So in those scenarios, though, you'd imagine it would start leaking small amounts before it did all at once. If a big, massive failure happened and the whole thing collapsed, then you'd imagine that's more likely to happen with a structure that's all the same.
Yeah.
If you see what I mean, rather than a small change, it would probably just like implode.
Yeah, sure.
An implosion might not be the end of the world, as long as it doesn't.
You have to have some way of setting off your self-destruct.
Yeah, as long as it doesn't release material.
Because even if it implodes and it doesn't release anything, but the self-destruct doesn't work, and it just sort of sinks to the bottom of the ocean, and then 10,000 years go by, and it's gradually eroded away, and now you have your spores,
that have been
your 3 spores that you didn't manage to wipe off your circuit board.
Yeah.
Have now started to colonise, and there's like a biofilm slowly spreading out around.
They happen to be the sort of thing that can colonise that type of environment.
Which is probably quite a low possibility.
It's low, but you've got to cut it down, write it down.
Less low than Mars risks.
Yes.
Surface of Mars risks, probably.
Yeah.
Because they're in the bottom of a big ocean.
Yeah. I guess you could also have deploy your, going back to the thing that you deploy your sort of the melting probe thing at the surface.
Oh, yeah.
You had that sterilised, okay? The outside of that sterilised.
Yeah.
Inside a sterile container. So the outside of this container is not sterile, but
just
the
inside
is.
A container like in the spacecraft or something.
Yes. And then you kind of put it outside the spacecraft and kind of drop the probe out, so there's nothing that ever touches the surface of the Europa that's, except for maybe the feet of the spacecraft, but it essentially drops out like a sterile probe. You wouldn't need to sterilize it on the way down either, because anything it picked up would just be from the surface of the Europa.
Surface or in the ice.
Yeah. Which is,
and it's fine. I mean, you're right. The legs of the I am imagining a dragon here.
Yeah.
The legs of the dragon are going to be on the ice, but they're not. You could deploy it. You could like stick an arm out and deploy it a good couple of meters away from the dragon legs.
Yeah.
So where it hits the ice
or something.
It's never been in contact with anything. So it just drops out of this sealed, sterile container onto the ice and then starts melting its way down.
It's more likely, I suppose, that you're going to. I suppose you could do that, or drop out at the bottom, the very bottom, or away from the legs.
Yeah.
But there's still the wash of the engines. I mean, that's
not going to be.
That's not going to be. It's going to kill stuff or whatever. But I'm just wondering if there's any way it could spread material around from the legs or something, like push material in towards the center of it if there's rockets, 4 rockets type thing pushing.
You could probably, I mean, all of these things are very, very, very detailed.
Yeah.
But they're going to have to be. You could probably do experiments looking at, what happens if you have contaminated legs and you fire a rocket and engine. Do you actually kick stuff up? Are you likely to spread bacteria spores around?
Where are they going to be? Yeah.
Yeah.
All that sort of stuff's going to have to be taken care of.
Yeah, it will. Yeah.
But maybe there is a way to do it. Maybe there is a way to do it. And I do feel like those challenges aren't going to stop us exploring under the ice one day. No, they won't.